You are Locked On Hawks POSTCAST, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
To the Locked On Hawks POSTCAST, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra. Batiste. Alongside me is NBA and college basketball analyst DeShaun Tate. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. And the Locked On Hawks POSTCAST is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Hawks were looking for their second dub on the road trip. So let's talk about how Trae and company found a different way of getting it done than you might think. And is the number one pick starting to show signs again? We'll discuss. But first, let's talk takes on how proud we are that the Hawks found their range. Should I say Trae did at just the right time in the 124-121 win over the Jazz. And Tate, you said win or lose, you are proud, Papa, and proud of the effort you saw today.
I am. Listen, usually, and I think the last time it was a wild ending. The last time I wore this same shirt, survive in advance, as you can see, Tenitra.
Right.
I'm usually it's meaning something else, but they found a way on tonight, and that's really what it's about: surviving in advance. And then, I like I said, I was surprisingly proud. I mean, not knowing how this was going to end, I kind of already had my story written to a degree, but surprisingly proud because most people are going to go and look at the fact that the Atlanta Hawks have double the amount of wins as Utah does. Utah has only won 2 games at home, 9 total, and just kind of looking at, on paper and all that kind of stuff, but not realizing that sometimes when, you're due for a win, and you're just one of those teams, and we know what it was like at one point in time being Hawks fans and stuff like that, where they were just a young team that just couldn't grow up fast enough for us and just looking for a win, looking for other teams to come up to Atlanta. And it was just like a passing through. It was just a layover, a reason to go to the gentleman's club. By the way, there's a basketball game being played tomorrow night kind of thing. And the Hawks didn't get caught up in that, especially without Jalen Johnson. I'm just really impressed with the way that the Hawks fought the way that they did, and the way that they've been doing it. To be honest with you, they didn't allow for Patty Mills, a former Atlanta Hawk, to be the random role player to kill him, if you will. I mean, there's just so many different elements and layers to the onion. Despite a really key third quarter comeback for the Utah Jazz, I think the Atlanta Hawks has always in their own way found a way to get comfortable into their sets, to be very fluid, to stick to their game plans the way that they have been, and not really getting flustered. Just, you're gonna beat the Hawks at their own game if you're going to do it. The Hawks don't get outside of their element. They have become this team with identity that has appeared to be like, hey, we know who we are. We know what we want to do. We know what kind of sets we want to get into. We know what we want to run. You're not going to get us discombobulated into playing the way you want us to play. Tonight, the Atlanta Hawks played the way they stuck to the game plan despite the comeback from Utah. And that was honestly, without even looking at the score of the last shot, that was honestly one of the more impressive things for me, that they did that on tonight, no matter who they're playing. They didn't overlook Utah.
Yeah, not at all. And I, too, had the same take because I was proud of them, win or lose, because there were points where obviously it went up and down and it looked like maybe the Utah Jazz were going to start to pull away because they were so successful shooting from 3 tonight. And when a team is as successful as they were, and they ended up only shooting 40% from 3, but there was a moment, especially earlier in the game, that's how they were able to get back in the first quarter, because they hit 9 of 13 and it looked like, oh God, it's going to be one of those nights from 3. But what I liked about the Hawks, despite the fact that you see that they shot the 3 44 times, if you paid attention to the flow of the game, they weren't chasing the 3 because the Jazz were making the 3. And I think that's so important. They were still taking threes at good times. They still had good shots. They were still making good decisions about when to take that 3. So I agree with you. I don't think this was a game where they were going to look at what the Jazz were doing and said, you know what, we're going to acquiesce and we're just going to try to chase it as well. Nope. They were having a good night from the field. 48% from the field, and they decided, hey, that's where we're going to win the game. We're going to win the game inside, and we're comfortable with that because we're not kind of having our best night at the 3-point line, even though they ended up pulling it back together and they ended up shooting almost 41% themselves. But that for me was a proud moment because, again, it won't be your night every night. And in the first half, it wasn't the Hawks night, despite the fact that they were up by 15 points in the first quarter. They ended the quarter up 4. And that's the kind of thing that we've seen in prior games or prior seasons where the Hawks will have a little bit of panic mode and then they'll just go after the 3, right? And they'll just heave it up early in the clock and then get kind of discouraged, disappointed, out of rhythm. And then the other team kind of is able to pull away. But that didn't happen tonight. This was a pretty even game, despite the fact that the Utah Jazz were hitting threes at the clip they were in the beginning, because you still got to halftime and it was a 3-point game. And then the Hawks still ended up winning the third quarter, despite the fact that that's where it looked like the Utah Jazz were actually going to come back and kind of take it. And I think it's funny that you mentioned Patty Mills, because I was like, oh no, another one of those former Hawks who come in here and snatch souls. So I was really glad that didn't happen, because he literally tied his season high of 9 points in like 4 minutes with the Jazz. And I thought, oh man, it's going to be
one of those nights.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, not this. So I really did like the fact that, yes, they played their game. And also, I like when you and I are able to talk about a turnaround from this team. And when you think about what this looked like in Saturday's game, 23 turnovers. I mean, you're not going to win most games when you're turning the ball over 10 times.
That's right.
Times. You turn it over just 10 times, you're probably winning the game. Like, I think they walked out of the first quarter with 0 turnovers. That, also made me feel really, really good about their chances to walk away with a win tonight.
I agree with you, Tenitra. And I mean, listen, and everybody knows that obviously from a turnover standpoint, that's one of those areas and just departments of which it's almost like there's never a time that you can't improve upon those, right? But just like you said, the kind of the turnaround, I mean, they had double that amount. I think you were saying in the last game. You also look at this game where, Utah is not only playing with house money, they also like to throw that lob and like to get some dunks. I mean, this is a good team. They're a young team. I don't think anybody's talking about how they're not good. I think you definitely have to talk about how young they are. But they're definitely a good team. Now, I was a little disappointed that we didn't get a chance to see John Collins and stuff like that, because that's one of the things that was a storyline for us here in Atlanta. We were kind of anticipating being able to see him again on the floor at the same time. But I think, when you start adding in the fact, too, that these are two teams that ranked, I think Atlanta ranks first in the NBA in dunks, and Utah ranks third in the NBA in dunks. I mean, certain storylines or certain statistics are very similar between the two. I think Clint Capella is one of the highest ranked amongst players in the NBA in offensive rebounding, as is Walker Kessler. Both of those guys, I think, rank in the top 5. So it was primed to be a very exciting, highly anticipated matchup. And let's just be honest, if we're just gonna call a spade. We talked about this going into the 6-game West Coast road trip. If there was a game that stuck out like a sore thumb that we thought would be the most likely that the Atlanta Hawks could win, maybe with the exception of the Toronto Raptors, but that could be a potential trap game, because it's right after those 3 against, the one against Denver and then the 2 against, the California teams. Exactly. And then you still got on the back end that Phoenix team. You got a hungry Utah team that's sitting right there and ready and in need, desperate need of a win against some really, really good players on those teams. Some experience. I think it's a good one pulled out. Nobody's going to talk about it because they're going to look at the record, but that's a really good win for the Atlanta Hawks, just to be able to say that they got a win.
Yeah, and nobody's going to necessarily talk about the win, but they sure will be talking about what happened at the end of the game to get these Hawks to win. So we're going to talk about that when we come back in the and one. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And the FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. So visit the FanDuel.com website because you'll see betting lines around teams, leagues. You might want to look at that wild card game and wonder if that team that snuck in ahead of the Atlanta Falcons, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, will actually be able to get a wild card win and move on, for example, or if the Pittsburgh Steelers, who stumbled into the postseason, can actually get a win against the Texans. So visit FanDuel, or Ravens rather. That's going to be a tough one for them. Visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sports book partner of the NFL and, of course, America's #1 sports book. This was one of those interesting games where literally we try our best. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other players that definitely made some contributions tonight at some key moments. But Trae Young, to me, his game tonight kind of embodied what this team was about tonight and has had to be about kind of, for the most part, on this road trip, because you look at the lineup tonight, you look at the starting lineup and you see Vit Krejci inserted in that starting lineup because you have no Jalen Johnson, right? So you're thinking, okay, how's that going to work out? And then you're wondering, okay, Bogdan Bogdanović, he's still coming back slowly but surely, kind of dealing with an injury. Same thing for Dyson Daniels, kind of on his way back. And what would this look like? And I really felt like the way that Trae Young played this game was it was the epitome of how the Hawks did things differently tonight. So again, you're doing it without Jalen Johnson, who's pretty much your 1B for this Hawks team. And you're doing it away from the perimeter. Like, you literally said, you know what? Until we're able to get our shots to fall from deep, we're going to go inside and we're going to try to win the battles inside where we can. So whether that is blocks, 11 blocks tonight, or whether it's points in the paint, they outscored the Utah Jazz 50-38 points in the paint. And I really like the fact that that was just an example of how the Hawks said, okay, if we can't get it done from three, we'll get it done in some different ways. And I felt like Trae Young did the same thing because, DeShaun, we got midway through the second quarter and Trae Young still didn't have any points, had 7 assists, but didn't have any points. It ended the game with 20 points. But first things first, when you look at the way that Quinn Snyder called this game and how he used his lineups, how did you like the lineups he put on the floor to complement Trae?
I liked it. I'll be honest with you. Every time I when I've seen Jalen Johnson out for the games that he's been out and seeing Vit Krejci, in the starting lineup, sometimes I tend to cringe a little bit, especially in these instances where, he's a liability on the defensive side of the ball. And then coming off the bench, as happy and glad as I am to see Bogey come back, he also, too, sometimes is a liability on that side of the ball as well. So it's definitely good to see, and it kind of goes to your point to show that this is a team that, again, I'm just not used to this being the Atlanta Hawks identity, that they look like they can beat you in a multiple different types of ways. Okay, like you said, you don't want to go dump it down low and play hungry hippo and bully ball. We can do that. You want to shoot it from the outside? Check this out. I got a few guys, one of them last name Matthews, that's coming off the bench that can fire it up like a cannon from three. By the way, this guy named DeAndre Hunter, who's one of the most improved in the NBA, likely going to be up, if not leading, for 6-man this year. Anytime that he converts for 4 or more threes like he did tonight, they're now considered 9-1 in that record. So I think that is good. And just talking about somebody like Trae, maybe it's just me, but it kind of seems like, I think everybody's kind of taking notice of him kind of being a little bit more passive, a little bit kind of distributing and facilitating the ball, establishing some stuff first. Kind of seems like he's challenging himself in those regards a little bit. So when you're able to see him lead with the pass first, in a lot of these games, and they're still able to come away with wins. I think that speaks some volume. I think at one point in time, he had scored or assisted on the team's first 39 of 42 converted baskets.
Yes.
That says something. That says a lot. And to be honest with you, that's not just any defender. If there's somebody that I know, and of course this guy has a tie to Atlanta too, that if there's somebody that just definitely is not the prototypical offensive guard that everybody talks about Colin Sexton being, if there's not something that he hates more, and that's being scored on, and you can take that kind of rivalry or battle between him and Colin Sexton back to, you know, their days in college when Oklahoma played Alabama, or back when they were on the high school level, on the AAU level, all of these different instances, the McDonald's All-American game, they were drafted in the same draft class, very familiar with each other. That's a tough cover for not only Colin Sexton, but also for Trae Young. So I think that it kind of speaks volume when you have somebody like a Colin Sexton who look as good as he did down the stretch and hit one of those big time baskets that he looks like was going to finish the game off until Trae Young, did what Trae Young does.
Exactly. And another bit of kudos for Trae, when Colin Sexton was furious tonight and he's walking up and down, pacing and kind of glaring and screaming at the Hawks bench, my thought was, and kind of staying in that space for a little too long, going back and forth with the referees. That's something that we used to see with this Hawks team a lot. And we'd say, just get back on defense and just push forward. Like, okay, you disagree with the no call, or you disagree with the call that came against you, but you got to keep moving. Little things like that, subtle things like that, that we're not seeing nearly as much this year. I think that's amazing. And I think that it is a compliment to Quinn Snyder that he's getting Trae to understand you can use the first half of a game or the first quarter or even into 3 quarters to get your guys set up, and still you're going to get yours. Whereas sometimes it felt like I would hear people say, well, dang, you know, I see Trae trying to get his teammates involved, but he seems too passive. I feel like now we're starting to see the balance. Getting them involved, but still being aggressive when he needs to be aggressive. That's how you finish a game with not just 20 assists that show that you're getting your people involved, but you're also finishing the game with 24 points and not afraid to take that dagger-like shot from the logo to say, hey, nope, we don't feel like staying here for overtime. We need to get to Phoenix, so I'm about to end this thing. So I love that we are seeing that, and we're seeing Quinn Snyder do some really great things like he always does with mixing up the lineup. But I like where he's inserting certain players as well. Like you said, Garrison Matthews hitting a 3 at just the right time. DeAndre Hunter hitting a couple of threes that were absolutely necessary to just keep a little bit of that space between the Hawks and the Jazz. So I definitely like the way that Quinn Snyder mixes up his matchups. Also with Trae, we talked about, the fact that all he did was get 15 plus assists for the 10th straight game. And yet when it came down to it, DeShaun, he still has the mentality of, but I can shoot this from the half court and it'll go in and we're going to walk out of here. And I still love the moxie of that, such that, hey, if it didn't go in, okay, we're going to overtime. But at the end of the day, he did everything that you would have wanted him to do. He scored the 24 points. He got the 20 assists, and he also played a clean game because he only turned the ball over a couple times tonight.
And makes it look effortless sometimes when he's doing it, to be honest with you. And, let's definitely wake up. I don't forget about those times when people talk about, well, which guy should have been traded, or this guy can't do this, or this guy can't do that, or he's too small, or that style of play is not winning style, which some of that I did respectfully and agree with in some moments. Sure. But again, this is one of those situations where it not only looks like the maturation of his game, but even also of him. By no means am I saying he's this Chris Paul, Gary Payton, Draymond Green type of leader, but I think that I'm starting to also see that he's being a little bit more vocal. He's kind of somewhat becoming the point guard a little bit more than he was before, of the type of leader that you want on the floor. I can't speak on the locker room stuff as much, but it looks like he's holding some guys accountable. It looks like he's taking it hard sometimes, not too hard, but finding a good balance when things are definitely on him, learning from some of his previous mistakes. Again, remember, just like much of anybody or anything in life, everybody develops a little bit differently. Did it take him 6 to 7 years in the league to kind of figure some of this stuff out and get with the right coach and what have you? Sure. But again, that's just something that happens. So definitely credit to him, and he deserves all of his kudos on a night like tonight.
Yeah, and speaking of developing differently, but developing nonetheless, we got somebody that on this road trip really started to look good and started to look good consistently. We'll talk about him in What's Next. This episode of our Locked On Hawks postcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Basketball season is heating up, and there's no better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars than with Prize Picks. Whether you're a diehard fan or just love some friendly competition, Prize Picks makes it fun and easy to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. So here's how it works. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. So think about this. Trae Young drops 24 points and hits the game-winning shot. Or think about the fact that the Hawks, who were abysmal in the beginning of the game, ended up with 41% shooting from threes. Hey, Prize Picks lets you make predictions and put your money where your mouth is in just 60 seconds on how a game might play out. You can use Prize Picks. If you haven't used it all season, get to it, because you can still have more than enough fun and get the money fast if you hit sometimes as quick as 15 minutes. It's got to be exciting, right? So now's the perfect time to join. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. So go to Prize Picks, download that app today, because Prize Picks helps you to run your game. So one of the really good things we saw tonight was the performance of Zaccharie Risacher, which the reason we're calling it out is because, as you mentioned, and as we mentioned going into the break, it's not just tonight. We're starting to see that consistency where not only does he have double digits, which for the Hawks, that it was a great thing because they had 7 of the 9 players who suited up in double digits tonight. Zaccharie Risacher being one of them, 14 points, 6 rebounds, and those 14 points came on 6 of 14 shooting from the field, and you went 2 of 4 from 3. But I think what we like the most about what we're seeing is the consistency in Risacher's game.
For sure. When you're looking at, some of what he has done as of late, and again, you got to remember is a lot of it is probably not going to, stick out like a sore thumb or something that's going to be popping out the page at you. But when you factor in that he has scored in double digits in 4 of the last 5 games. And I'm not talking about 10 points here, 11 points there. I'm talking about in the teens for all of those double digits in scoring that he has had. I think that says something on top of the fact that it's been on the road, that it's been against some pretty quality teams for the most part. Prior to that 5 games, last 5 games, the 5 previous to that, he scored double digits in just 2 of those 5 games, and 1 of them he edged and got in there by 10 points. So I think there were just some instances at some point in times in the season prior to him kind of going off and stringing together some of his better handful of games. It sometimes kind of felt like it was a game being played of 5-on-4 sometimes, where the Hawks only had 4 players on the floor, where he's, definitely everybody's going to have their rookie moments. And I do believe that, he is one that being a number 1 pick and that 1 next to his name, he's not under the same kind of pressure that a lot of other number 1 picks typically are. He's being able to be brought in slowly and kind of gradually learning about the system and kind of having a lot of pressure that is just not on him, but certainly a good job for him. And we just hope that continues, because it felt like when he was coming right out the gate, people was like, we might have something here. Then he goes off against the Knicks for like 33. Then things start to kind of diminish and slow down a little bit, where some games look okay. And then it was like he wasn't even in the arena, like he didn't even take the trip. Now things are starting to go back up. We could just hope that continues.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think you're starting to see a comfort level that he has with his teammates, with the game kind of slowing down for him, a confidence that's starting to build up. And that's something that's so critical, because you look at the fact that Jalen Johnson, who's kind of day to day right now, you don't know how much you're going to miss him. So everyone in the front court for the Hawks has to step up and has to fill in quite a bit of a gap at both ends of the court. So to see Zaccharie Risacher kind of take that and roll with it and run with it and say, hey, I'm going to contribute the best way that I can. I really like what we saw out of him. I think that we're seeing some, like we said, the consistency there. And I wanted to go back to DeAndre Hunter real quick as well, because I thought that he had a really, really good game, especially in that second half when they needed him most to kind of get in there and also contribute from both ends of the court. But there were a couple of critical threes that Dre made tonight that I felt like really kind of made the difference. And like I said, getting 4 rebounds in there at critical times and just turning the ball over a couple times, I felt like he really utilized his 27 minutes very well and showed you that level of maturity, that level of consistency and confidence that we're starting to see a whole heck of a lot, where DeShaun, we can say, hey, even if Dre has a slow first half, we have confidence that he's going to come back and make a contribution at the perfect time in that second half.
Yeah, well, we always talk about some of the most, consistent players and moments, play guys on this team, even when we don't see the most consistent shooting from Trae, even if we don't have Jalen on the floor, who we know is very consistent. Obviously, we talk about the lack of consistency with Zaccharie Risacher and maybe a couple others. Even Dyson Daniels, as consistent as he's been, there's kind of been some drop-offs from time to time. DeAndre really hasn't had too many of those instances, to be honest with you. And honestly, looking at it, I don't really know what's gotten into him, but it hasn't just necessarily been, him scoring the basketball and playing good defense.
Right.
It's just something about this little bit of a different swag or moxie, or I don't know if somebody's, lit a fire under his belly. He's kind of playing with a little bit more aggression than I'm used to. One thing that I was concerned about before with him is that sometimes he brought his cool demeanor and conservative type of mentality, or just naturally who he is or appears to be anyways as a person, to the floor with him, and which you can't really afford sometimes. I haven't been seeing that player nearly as much. And guess what? I haven't been hearing as much, Tenitra. I used to get on here and it felt like every single night I was talking about the motto for the Hawks always seeming to be consistently inconsistent. I don't feel like we've been saying that for probably for about a couple months now anyways.
Easily. And I think for Dre, where that moxie comes from is that the freedom that he has to just play his game coming off the bench, because he's still getting heavy minutes. I mean, he's still got 27 minutes in the game, but it's not the same pressure as a starter. It's not the same pressure if you're expected to contribute for 40 to 48 minutes when the game is all on you. I think Quinn taking that pressure off of him and telling him, hey, you're going to get heavy minutes off the bench, but you're going to come off the bench and be one of the critical components of our second unit. I think that the way Quinn framed it was perfect. DeAndre was receptive. And I also think that when you're only playing maybe 20 to 27 minutes a game, that's probably not as much pressure on your body, because I think a lot of times too, maybe some of that lack of confidence or consistency came from the fact that his body just wouldn't hold up. And I would imagine if you're playing 20 games and you're playing at a high level, and then all of a sudden your body stops you for 12, and then you got to get back, and then it's up and down, back and forth. I think that would mess with anybody's psyche. I think it would mess with anybody's confidence. But now I think playing less gives you less of a propensity or possibility to get injured. I think that's what's been a big component for him, to utilizing him in the right way. I think it's working for him, and it's a good look.
Yeah, it's taking some pressure off of this team a little bit with being able to rely on him, even when there are instances where he's not, playing that particular game like he wasn't earlier in the season. It doesn't feel like when there's games when he's not playing that they're long, drawn out, injuries where he's out for 20 games or anything like that. And even when he's not on the floor, it doesn't appear, sometimes it there's not a drop off when he's on or off the floor, which I think is good. That's showing a little bit about what this team has in terms of when you look at the definition of what an actual team is and what it looks like. There's really no drop off, with the exception of not having a backup point guard when Trae goes off the floor. That when anybody comes off the floor, and last thing I want to say is, let's give some credit to a guy like Clint Capella, who certainly was on the receiving ends of a bunch of dunks. We know he always is. Does a great job at cleaning up around the rim. Had 18 points on tonight. Sure, he dropped off a little bit from a rebound standpoint. I'm okay with that. Onyeka Okongwu went down with an injury. Clint Capella stepped in the clutch moments and definitely provided some good contribution for the team as well.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of only had 2 points in the game in the 23 minutes he played, but definitely the 9 rebounds were critical, and critical that he had 7 of those on the defensive end, because as we know, in a close game like tonight, minimizing the opportunity for second chance points is so very critical. But yeah, I tell you, you hope that the team is off to Phoenix, and maybe you'll see some more heroics like Trae, and the heroics just go everywhere. It goes back to what you were saying about him and Colin Sexton in the back and forth, and Colin hits the game tying 3 and then kind of defends Trae, but kind of doesn't. And Trae's like, oh, okay, you're going to defend me. You're going to defend me from about 11 feet out. Okay, do that. And I'm going to absolutely take advantage. So I think that's one of those things that gives the team some momentum going into that Phoenix Suns game. And the fact that, once again, he's doing something with these 2020 type games, and becomes the first time that a player had done that in a season since like John Stockton back in like 89, 90. I mean, something crazy. So those are the types of things where, when you think back to those days of a John Stockton and a Karl Malone and what it actually looks like you said, not overstepping the boundaries and saying he's going to be the next John Stockton, but you do also want to give credit when he's playing at that kind of level and it's actually leading to success for this team. So like we said, finally, they're going to wrap up this long road trip that seems like they've been on the road forever at Phoenix Thursday night. What are the keys to them walking away with another dub? And DeShaun, that would mean what? Coming home 500 off the road trip.
For sure. And that sounds kind of almost just about what I thought I said going into it, or somewhere relatively close to it. But I think it's just, excuse me, keeping the same energy that you kept, excuse me, continuing to just kind of be competitive. This is going up against a team that just lost to Charlotte on tonight. So I know that they're going to be nice and angry, but yet still, I always love the Atlanta Hawks to be in position where they are the underdog going into a game, especially against one as vulnerable as the Phoenix Suns, who looks like they've just kind of been trying to put together a team to win a championship versus trying to build it organically the way that the Atlanta Hawks are doing.
Yeah, it should be an interesting matchup, because we know the Hawks did actually have some good games against the Phoenix Suns last season, and we look for the same Thursday night. Locked On Sports Atlanta is the #1 place to hang out after every game. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and for more on the Hawks, check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We will see you Thursday night.